Welcome, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Glad to see so many folks joining us. We'll give people a few seconds to get their audio connected, and then we'll get started. We've still got some people filtering in. Welcome. All right. And folks are saying hello in the chat. You are most welcome to introduce yourself in the chat. And I will get us started by introducing myself and the other two speakers today. We have three speakers on today's topic, which is new ways to interact with AI, virtual, augmented, and mixed reality, which together are sometimes called extended reality. I'm Christopher Hoadley. I'm a professor at UB in both the Department of Learning and Instruction and in the Computer Science Department. I also direct the Institute for Learning Sciences here. My two colleagues joining us are Xinqian Tu, who is a postdoctoral scholar in the University of Buffalo Institute for Learning Sciences, and Dr. Aaron Kearney, who is a professor of learning and instruction and also the department chair of the Department of Learning and Instruction at UB. I see we have a number of other UB colleagues here as well, and folks from off campus. Hearty welcome to everybody. I'm going to pass the mic off to Xinqian, who will give us some initial remarks. Just so people know the structure, we're going to do a little bit of presenting, then we're going to have a little bit of panel discussion among the three of us, and then we're going to open it to Q&A and hopefully have a broader discussion. So, Xinqian, take it away.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this panel. I do appreciate everyone's time this afternoon. I hope you all learn something or have something that we can learn from you as well. So I'm Xintian Tu. I'm current postdoc researcher at UB, and I'm gonna starting with some basic concepts of extended reality. And my topic is more about learning and working with extended reality. So when we talk about the short-term XR, typically it refers to extended reality, which is a big word for both virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And how we see this extended reality exist in our life is basically where that you connect your physical world, which means myself and work with my objects and in a physical space like a classroom in a building, and then mixture them with some digital world such as digital characters and simulation and games. So basically everything you see in a simulation in a game console or see in your computer. And the overlap here is basically where the extended reality exists. So I think there's a lot of thing happening for the new technology, and what is really new recently is basically the technology has developed a lot. For example, the way we can tracking people's movement or tracking the real life has allowed multiple participants to engage in learning together. For at the very beginning, when we do the VR, it's basically individual, but nowadays the technology allowed us to do tracking multiple participants as well. And also nowadays the technology becomes smaller and smaller. That makes the mobile learning environment able to move outside of schools. In the past days, when I move this equipment, we need actually SUV at least, or sometimes we borrow vans. But nowadays, equipment becomes smaller and smaller. That allows us to bring it to different settings to really implement these studies. And the last thing is artificial intelligence has grown a lot. So basically, we can use different types of algorithms to calculate real-time feedback and provide more accurate feedback for both teachers and students. And that also lead us to some new learning environment. So the learning environment could be more collaborative and more interactive. And there's definitely more multiple data sources being tracked and can offer teachers for feedback. So how extended reality enhance learning and working experience? Definitely for the very beginning, it allow us to do multimodality interaction. For example, we can touch on different modalities. We can see things that we cannot observe, like micro biology things. And also we can create some sounds, auditorial, and also use our body to learn. And also we can make the abstract concept more tangible and easier to understand. And especially for STEM education, it helps us to help students build intuition in ways that were previously impossible. For example, I mentioned microbiology. Students might not be able to see it in some circumstance, but with the extended reality, they actually can interact with these elements in microbiology concepts. So it also help us to help young children or students to turning these imaginary situation into digital representations. So I'm here using one example from my previous research. It's basically we have these antennas around the classrooms. When we put the antenna in classroom, students' movement are tracked and turned to bees' movement. So when young children try to learn about honeybee system and how bees collect nectar and pollinate flowers, actually they can see themselves turning into bees and interact with the entire ecosystem, all happening in their classroom. And also there are other ways to learning within the system. So basically they can help students to understand complex science concepts, and they can also take the perspective of target concept. As I just mentioned, elementary students can learn honeybees while they were real honeybees in the classroom. And we can turn students into bees in the simulation. Another way that we may think about is it can help us do training for healthcare or other works. For example, in healthcare nowadays, they use VR to do some training on operations and surgeries so they can practice in advance and it feel more real with your hand controllers. And there's some things that I was thinking about extended reality. So basically how we think about the potential of skill. For now, based on technology or the research, I think there's a potential to collaborate with more community outside of formal school settings and professional settings such as museum, library, or local communities. And also one thing I'm keeping in mind is how we can really design this technology more equitable and accessible. For now, my research is a bit narrowed on the school settings, but I really want to see how I can apply universal design for learning guidelines into this research with extended reality and also design more inclusive and welcoming environment for diverse learners. No, thank you.
And I'll take it up from here. Thank you for that, Chen. One of the things that you may be asking yourself, this is an AI in education series, and so what does this all have to do with AI? And so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. If we could go to the next slide. Um, right. Can you advance the slide? There we go. Thank you. Um, So this is a pair of pictures of the Apple Vision Pro, and I just wanted to make one point here. Um, when we think about virtual reality or augmented reality, oftentimes what we're talking about is things that happen with your vision and with your hearing. And on the one hand, that sounds simple enough, and on the other hand, it's pretty hard. These are some pictures that help show all the sensors that are involved in the brand new Apple Vision Pro. And without going into too much detail here, this device has cameras to look at your eyeballs, at your cheeks, at your hands in front of you and in your lap. It has cameras to look at the world out in front of you, including a LiDAR scanner so that it can do a 3D mapping of the world around you. Um, it has little lights inside that are infrared that it can use to light up the part of your face that's hidden by the goggles so that the cameras can point at your eyeballs and see where your eyes are looking in the virtual world. And the device doesn't have any windows out into the real world. It just has cameras that take in information from the world, composite it with computer generated imagery, and then superimpose those in a way on two very fancy displays in front of your eyeballs that then track as you move your head around so that you see the world in a very natural way that's very similar to the way we see the world as we move around in space. Similarly, there's a lot of fancy technology around the sound. So you may not realize how good you are at telling where sound is coming from. And so being able to really fake you out so that you can hear things in the real world and be able to localize them in your environment, but then also hearing things that are synthesized and they sound like they're coming from the right place. These are the kind of cutting edge technologies that are in consumer versions of AR and VR. But we don't have to limit ourselves to these two senses. I don't know, people don't have their cameras on, so I won't do show of hands, but has anybody done the Soarin' ride at Disney? Right? This is a simulated hang glider flight, and they lift you up in a chair, and the chair tilts to make you feel gravity on your body, so you influence proprioception. They blow wind on your face, so you have tactile senses. There are scents put into the wind blowing on your face, so it smells like a pine forest or an orange grove. Scent as a sensory input. So those are also virtual or augmented reality. It's just we don't usually talk about that when we're talking about AR, VR at the moment, but in due time. Next slide. Um, this question of what's the AI in extended reality is kind of a hard one to answer because what counts as AI is a moving target. I've put some bullets here on things that people might have differing opinions on whether it counts as AI. We talk about AI these days. Oftentimes, people are thinking of things like ChatGPT, where you can, have a conversation with a text-based chat agent. Um, but 20 years ago, being able to scan and do optical character recognition on the addresses on your envelopes in the postal system was considered AI. Having computers that could have differential behavior based on sort of rules, things like image recognition, tutoring systems that respond to the learner's input, speech recognition, gesture recognition, all of this kind of stuff has kind of at one point or another been called AI. And these days, I think the question is less about what's the current definition of AI, but just recognizing that all these advances are influencing what we can do with AR, VR, XR. If we go to the next slide, I really like this three buckets that came from a systematic review paper in the literature. And they really kind of combed through everything they could find. It was published in 2021, so it's not too old. But they sort of noted three main areas where AI kind of creeps into extended reality for education. One was interpretation of XR generated data. So this idea of all these sensors pointing at your hand gestures, and the AI is using them to tell whether you're pointing at something with your finger or looking at something with your eyes. That's very relevant for things like medical training. Affective computing is when computers recognize your emotional state. Um, Conferring intelligence on the XR is the second bucket they did, and this is where essentially, if you're looking at things that are virtual or things that are mixed with the real world around you, giving the stuff around you, I mean, you could have a virtual reality rock, and that might be boring, right? But if you have a virtual reality person that's, like a character in a game that interacts with you, that's not an actual human, the more intelligent the behavior of that character, the more interesting, this environment is. And so this idea of adding intelligence into the extended reality with AI is another important bucket. And then the third one, and this is, I think, especially important for us as educators to remember when when we sign up for projects with big companies and that sort of thing, is sometimes the virtual reality is there just to collect data for training AIs. So self-driving cars is a really good example. A lot of how these self-driving systems for Teslas or other cars are built. Yeah, sometimes you have real people driving real cars on real roads with a lot of sensors and a lot of information that can be fed into the AI. But it's also possible to collect that kind of data by having someone drive a virtual car around in a virtual world and see what they do. And maybe the virtual world is a little more controlled and easy for the computer to learn from. So using AI and XR as a way to train AIs as a third version that isn't for the benefit of the learner per se, it's for the benefit of the people developing the AI. If we go to the next slide, um, these are sort of four major kinds of technology change that I and my colleague Suraj Uttamchandani wrote about a few years back. And I kind of see these as the four big shifts in our recent history with technology. So, one is the amount of data we've got and the kind of data that can be collected. I mean, just imagine what you can do with somebody wearing an Apple Vision Pro. You can see everything they look at. You can track where their eyes are pointed at all times in real time and save that and analyze it. Um, this idea of retina grade experiences as we get more and more compelling and immersive ways to display information from the computer into our sensory systems. We have a lot of new paints on our palette to paint the environments, the learning environments that we're trying to create for students. Um, Both of those two wouldn't be super useful if there weren't great algorithms to kind of glue things together. So if you're wandering around in a video game and there's lots of interactivity and it's a very realistic looking setting and you can go through a whole virtual world, like that's a lot of fancy AI and other advanced algorithms to create and maintain that environment for you. And then, of course, the fourth one is who has technology? More and more people have technology. Um, I think it was around 2017 that more than half of the world was on the internet. So there are people at the International Telecommunications Union who track how much of the world has access to a phone, how much of the world has access to the internet. And we reached a more than half the human species has the internet around 2017. Um, but that also means nearly half doesn't. And when we talk about fancy technologies like these, on the one hand, smartphones get more and more ubiquitous. On the other hand, there are people who are left out. And so that trend is really important for us to pay attention to. Um, and hopefully that provides some food for thought. I will pass it to my colleague, Erin, to take us home.
Thanks, Chris. I'm learning a lot already, and certainly from different perspectives than I come from. I'm coming from the perspective of somebody who researches teaching and learning, including teacher education. And I am a teacher educator. So I'm going to walk you a little bit through some of the trajectory that I've been on as I have dipped my toe into the virtual reality pool. Could I get the next slide? Thank you. So a lot of the this foray into virtual reality has come to me through my interest in this idea that when we learn to become a certain kind of professional, one way of thinking about that is that we learn how to see and in that way be and sort of interpret and then act as if we were occupying that embodying that kind of identity already. So it was this theory and then subsequent research on professional vision that really had attracted me to the idea of what kinds of representations are present in teacher education, how new and experienced teachers draw on those to make sense of the work of teaching. Of course, we all come to our learning with different kinds of attitudes, dispositions, and mindsets. But through the process of professional socialization, or what Goodwin talks about as the development of professional vision, we learn to see through new lenses. So I had been doing work on video-based research and looking at what goes on in classrooms and working with new teachers and experienced teachers to deconstruct those things. Um, we've all been in classrooms where things run very, very smoothly, but if we go in without a whole lot of knowledge of the students or a lot of information and practice with instruction, things don't go as smoothly for us. So it looks easy, but it's often not. So these exercises are often in deconstructing, analyzing, and talking around different representations of teaching. What's also interesting, really interesting to me about this concept is that we're not being socialized or quote unquote trained into a particular lockstep kind of vision about teaching when we have these experiences in teacher preparation. The idea of contested vision is also really interesting to me, that whatever representations we put in front of teachers, they deserve to be questioned. They deserve to be pushed and interrogated. And so that was another part of professional vision that really sort of hooked me from the beginning. And while I was thinking in terms of things that looked like glasses and just look eyeballs looking at a screen, then I started to realize there were other options like virtual reality. So on the next slide, you'll see something that I experimented with a little bit as a teacher educator, and we called it Envision Teaching. And we started to a small team started to build a little library of very naturalistic footage of a real classroom. So a place where things were going really well and where language diversity was especially prominent. It wasn't just a drop in and video record with a 360-degree camera and then pop out. There was a long engagement with the teacher, lots of conversations about what the representations could be. And it led to what you see on the screen, which is a small library of immersive segments. You've got a little bit of a sense at the bottom of the screen what it was like to peek into that classroom. And on the next slide, you'll see some of the ways that oh, one more. There you go. Thank you. That's it. Some of the ways that the immersive segments that got created from that collaboration with one teacher, how they got fed back into experiences with pre-service teachers. So generally what we tried to do was start some kind of framing conversations with teachers. So for example, I think on this particular day, we were looking at the New York State culturally and linguistically responsive and sustaining framework, then immersing teachers in a segment where there was lots of rich interaction and lots of examples that they could point to that might exemplify those kinds of practices, or that they could question and say, well, how about this? What if the teacher did that? And that's really what happened in the post-viewing response description analysis phase. And then, as a next step and very much in alignment with professional vision kinds of research, the applications, right? So what do you do with these new insights you gain from deconstructing and discussing an example of teaching practice? The next slide will help me to illuminate for you where some of our questions went next, because these are all designs, right? The virtual segments immersive segments that we created, they're just one option, and the options are seemingly endless when you have this kind of tool at your disposal. One of the questions that we started to ask ourselves was, okay, well, we had naturalistic footage. What does it look like when the representation is, at another end of the spectrum, at the other end of a continuum where things are completely generated and not naturalistic, based on reality, but not reality? What would that mean? And a very important question that also arose was, um, I worked with a teacher to create the immersive segments, but she and I were making the decisions. So what if somebody else was making the decisions about the design and how teaching got represented? So a second phase of this has been to engage some very early stage future teachers in telling some of their educational stories. And their stories are not exactly the same as the teaching population, for example. And so this has raised some really important questions, not only of about, where the representations come from and whose perspectives are represented, um, but we haven't used any of that with new teachers yet, sort of with the question in mind, is it, are we making these immersive segments? What is the purpose of it? Is it for the pre-service teachers to be able to tell their stories, or is it um, for our more, I mean, our primarily white female teachers to sort of experience something that they don't understand? And is that ethical, extractive? Is it, these sorts of questions are really important. So, one of the great things about VR is how wonderful it is in immersive experience. It has not to date been as interactive, and so AI introduces some interesting potential for that. Although I don't know nearly as much as my colleagues about the technical side of things or what that might look like. Um, but being able to create novel scenarios and ones that are more interactive is something that we've been talking about in our little group in Envision Teaching for some time.
Alrighty, awesome. So I can take over here. We have some pre-written questions for the panel, and after those questions have been discussed amongst the panel, we'd love to open the floor for discussion with folks who are in the audience. You're also more than welcome to sound off in the chat as folks are talking, weigh in. We will be watching the chat and we'll make sure that those voices are heard. So this first question is for the whole panel, what do you see as the promise of XR and AI technologies in education? What are you most excited about? And what are some of the examples out today that you think are most interesting?
I'll say one thing just to kick us off. I think, until you've tried VR technologies and folks who've, played around with headsets for gaming and that kind of stuff, it's definitely improving at a rapid pace. But I think the thing that's subtle but really important is how immersive our experiences are is really important to how we show up in a learning environment. So, I mean, I'm sure all of us have experienced Zoom fatigue as a result of the pandemic, and you wouldn't have thought that having a video conference would be more exhausting than a face-to-face meeting necessarily, but it is for reasons that have to do with how humans are built to have a certain kind of sensory input, and having a bunch of little heads on a screen just isn't the same. And so I think we're going to find a lot of interesting possibilities around like making stuff more realistic or more immersive is one word. Maybe that's not the right word, but like virtually realistic, like maybe unrealistic. Maybe it's like Avatar the movie. Are we having experiences that suit our kind of neurological apparatus better? And what opportunities does that give us as educators? I think that's the part I'm most excited about.
Absolutely.
Thank you everyone for great presentations. I can learn more about what's going on here. So I'm Yunjung Chang in Department of Learning Instruction with the same department with the presenters. But for me, I think it's very excited to how much we can more situated the learners and teachers, trainees in the reality like situations. So through the help of AI, it will learn and it will evolve more frequently and more they will provide more really realistic situations than others. And also it could be more adaptable to different situations. For example, in any settings, not only like medical settings or education settings or any circumstances, AI can learn and provide better fit it in version of situations, I think that's a really good benefit of using both XR and AI.
Definitely, definitely. Now, thinking about those positive benefits, I'm wondering what are some of the difficulties that you all see for XR and AI?
Well, I'll chime in just to say that my concern about well, it's just over-reliance, right? Uncritical use of and or uncritical designs. Um, I sort of would hope that AI could make our lives easier, and that some certain things being automated leaves us more time to be human. And so I think that's very optimistic, and I'm not sure that's the way that it will go. But I think if there's some chance of it, though, if we are critical in our use of all of these technologies.
Yeah, I would add one thing is some difficulty or maybe challenges of XR and AI. So one thing I notice is actually when we talk about digital literacy, the idea of digital safety is actually one part of it. But however, we have paid very limited attention to digital safety training, which is, I think, for now, not everyone really knows what AI can do, like 100%. We may know, even for me, like I might know 5% of what AI can do, but I still get confused by AI scam. Sometimes it could be. So I think one thing I think possibly is first how we can help our students and also for elders to understand AI and also to get them prepared and prevent them from the scam or get better AI and digital related safety training skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also seeing Chris in the chat that VR deepfakes are a scary thought. Absolutely. I'm wondering then in the realm of education, how do you think that the availability of AI-driven XR will raise new questions for education? So we often hear about concerns with AI and cheating or learning false information. Definitely throughout this learning series, that's something that comes up time and time again. Does XR for you all pose new issues or questions?
I'll throw one thing out there that I don't think anybody's doing research on, but we really need research on. How does VR and XR influence differentially people who are neurodivergent? I think, we know that people vary in the degree to which they get seasick in virtual reality headsets. Like that's just, the standard population. But I think one thing we really need to think about is like how are we developing tools that need to, I mean, if you're really hooking into people's sensory systems in this really complex way, you need to recognize that not everybody's the same and not everybody has the same neurological wiring. And that's a really important safety and equity question I think we need to investigate.
Yeah, I would add to that. I totally agree what Chris just said. I think it's not just about VR, but for most of mixed reality, I think the targeted learners or audience is people with no disabilities. But when we think like people of any like physical disabilities and neuro diverse peoples, it's hard to implement and to get them have the similar learning experience or working experience. So I think they might be our next step to think about how we can really pay attention to these populations and give them some similar experience.
Awesome, thank you. We've gotten a question in the chat that I think is an interesting example of our broader question. So I'll pose them both together and let you respond to whichever feels right. So the broader question is, what advice do you have for educators, ed tech folks, and administrators or policymakers who are deciding if and when to use XR for learning? And then kind of a narrower question from the chat, but a very interesting one. How does one choose the right application when so many exist and only few are ready to integrate? And then provides a list of resources. So I'm wondering for you all, how are we as educators meant to approach this world, and how do we make those determinations about what is safe and effective to use?
I can say that. So typically, I have two trends. So basically, my overall thinking about advice for educator and educational technologists is we always design for learning. We do not only choose the application for make it fancier in our classroom. So what I would suggest is always focus on our learning target and see how the technology fits and how it aligns with students' experience. So that's the first thing to suggest. And the second thing is I do have two different approach about how to choose what technology that I use. First one is on some research projects I developed with some CS faculties together, so I know which one is the best suit for my target audience. But that also is very research related. So we do not, in that approach, we do not use existing technology. So my second approach is more relate to real educators is I've used existing apps or iPad apps. That's a bit old, not really XR, but I've used different apps. So the way I choose app is we always go this trend is I search some apps at the very beginning and I do try them out and do some evaluation and see how these have pros and cons and how that can really align with my class or my working experience. Then I choose as a team which one I would love to use. So I agree this is a great question, but it also really depends on the context and it may take time to evaluate which one is better fit.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think, there's two aspects of this that are, just an extra challenge. One is um, some of you may have heard of the acronym TPAC, um, technological pedagogical content knowledge. So the idea of like knowing technology isn't enough, knowing your content area isn't enough, knowing the pedagogy in your area isn't enough. It's knowing what you can do with all three together. And that's going to be, for any individual educator, that's going to be a moving target. So, obviously you shouldn't be using technologies that don't work for you as an educator. But then there's also this moving target of the technology itself, both, like Alex said in the chat, when things are evolving monthly, if not weekly, and then recognizing that the kids are changing too, right? Like what is common? How many kids are walking in the door having played with an Oculus Quest or Meta Quest, or who have used different kinds of technologies? You're always gonna be making that decision continuously and not once and for all. One thing I would say that I think TPAC doesn't emphasize enough that I think is equally important is whenever, as an educator, you're making a decision about whether to adopt a technology. Obviously, it has to align with your pedagogical goals, but you also want to give at least some thought to, does this decrease or increase equity? So, the idea that some technologies may disadvantage certain people is something you always have to kind of keep in the back of your head. Like I said, concerns about who's neurodivergent, there might be issues around, is this easy for kids who have access to certain things that other kids don't have access to? And, just really kind of thinking about like, what are the ethics of whatever technology you're adopting? I mean, one thing I really wish we had like a good housekeeping seal of approval for technologies that are off the shelf about data privacy. And the reality is like, every school district sometimes gets a different privacy policy if they're buying things en masse, right? And how do you, as an educator, how do you keep on top of all that? Well, it's important. Somebody has to really pay attention to it. But, within a regular K-12 setting, like that's a team effort. That's not one teacher. That's like the district people, the district IT people, building leaders, classroom leaders. You all have to kind of have some sense of like, what is this going to do for equity, ethics, as well as pedagogy?
These are all definitely things that we sort of learned trial and error through our own projects. It really pronounced some practical elements that we were not savvy about before embarking on this exploration and experimentation. Although I wouldn't say that it was a bad thing to try, nonetheless. But you realize how quickly, when doing a project like this, how your fleet of VR headsets can rapidly fall out of maintenance, and just they need a lot of attention technologically, and then on the other end too, just what Chris is mentioning, the learning curve. It was very to make things concrete. It was very clear after a first session how much time and how much care would need to go into just orienting people to the use of this. So beyond the pedagogical, the just putting these on and acclimating to a new kind of experience was, for some of our teachers, a very new thing. So I think the balance of those sorts of practical issues is definitely counterbalanced by the exploration and the creation that can come out of using these kinds of things. I would encourage teachers, educators to sort of explore these things for themselves, but also with their students to sort of see what the potentials are. Once we had created immersive segments from a 12th grade or the 10th grade classroom, the first the premiere of the segments was with the class of students that were featured in the segments, and it was a really rewarding kind of experience. And they had all sorts of feedback for us on how we should design things differently the next time, which was really good for us to hear.
So from all of this, it sounds like there's so much pre-work and thinking and collaboration that goes into introducing these kinds of supports. At the risk of taking up time for other folks' questions, I'm wondering what tips you have for starting that conversation. We see in the chat it can be hard in a K-12 environment for folks to get permission to use apps. We can imagine there might be some hesitancy at the school or district level about using new technologies. So any thoughts that you all have on opening those conversations, I think would be helpful for some of the folks in the audience here.
I mean, one thing I'll say is, oftentimes adults get scared of wading into new things. I think, the stereotype is that kids learn technology faster, that they're more digital native, and therefore they, are smarter about technology. It's true, kids may have greater exposure to new things or might be a little bit more flexible than the adults. But I think a lot of how kids get this reputation for being techno wizards is they're fearless. And so this idea of like one thing you need to do to begin all these conversations is to, bring your curious self and your interested self and your wondrous self as opposed to your terrified self. And I think especially with AI, a lot of us have seen stuff where we're like, oh shit, what are we getting ourselves into? Like there's a lot of fear and loathing about AI. And I don't think AI is monolithic. It's not all good or bad, but we have to be able to sort of wander in and say like, okay, well let's learn, let's understand this. And with VR, it's also very similar. I mean, another thing that I'll say about starting the conversation that's really tricky is sometimes it's really hard to have an informed conversation about some of these environments without trying them. And so like having demos, having hands-on time is sometimes required to even be able to talk about it because there's so much of it that just doesn't translate into emails among staff at your school, right? And figuring out how to do that is a little tricky sometimes, but it can also be really powerful to just have people share an experience and then start from there, start the conversation from there. Oh, I love that.
For folks in the recording or who aren't watching the chat, we have a chat message to that point. I also think we're in a unique window of time where AI and VR applications are new to both teachers and students, and we have an opportunity to truly learn together. I think that's certainly true. I want to open the floor up for any questions. If you feel most comfortable using the chat, I will read them out for the recording. And if not, you can feel free to just unmute or ask any questions that you might have. So what I'm seeing is that our presenters did a fantastic job and answered all possible questions. It was a fantastic presentation, you all, and I thank you for being here. While we have a second, I'll just take a minute to plug. We do these sessions monthly. We've got 3 left this year, and we'd love to see some of you back. Oh, awesome. A chat message that I will read out. How does one keep pace when units like the Oculus are upgraded every year? Districts can't keep up with the costs. I think that's a very, very practical question.
But that's exactly the problem that we've run into, John. So that's a very real concern. I don't know. Does anybody know? Can you send in your old ones and get refurbished or something? It's on a rotating kind of plan.
I mean, it definitely is a moving target in terms of like, are you ready to upgrade things? I think a lot of schools have gotten used to the idea of slower update cycles. It's not like there's a new iPad every time there's new iPads released in your school. And so thinking about like durability, cost over lifetime, these are the kinds of things that the IT folks in purchasing in your district should be able to help look at. Like how long can you reasonably expect a headset to last in regular use? And spoiler alert, it's not going to be as long as it does in home use. And so, just taking that into account when you're making decisions about adoption. Also, is it a special thing or is it an everyday thing, right? Because a bunch of headsets that kids are taking home with them, man, that's going to get worn out a lot faster than something that you bring out for certain units, where it's really high value, and maybe you have one classroom set for the district, right? Like that's a really different way to approach it. And so thinking about like what's the cost benefit ratio every time you're applying this technology is also part of it.
I think Alex briefly unmuted. Alex, if you're still around, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, essentially, the technology is changing very rapidly. I mean, even right around the corner right now, you've got MetaConnect, which is tomorrow, and they're going to be releasing, you've got a $200 headset, a $300 headset, a $500 headset, a $1,000 headset, which is on sale for about $250 if you're a nonprofit. So, they've got a lot of options in that space, and I think the depth of application base, just based on what was started in desktop and has moved its way to the mobile market, is expansive, right? There are definitely other headset manufacturers out there. But from what I've seen and from what I've experienced out of the 1,000 apps that I've tried on the multiple devices I've owned, I would say that the evolution is something you like you said, you can stay with the cycles of the 2 to 3 year cycle. You just have to be comfortable with the technology that you have. You might not have the latest features and latest capabilities. Like a lot of the mixed reality and augmented reality is still in experimental stages. A lot of the eye tracking, face tracking, leg tracking is still in experimental stages. They work, but they work better in desktop when you've got a fully loaded system and you've got all the capabilities to track the data and not let it impact the user experience. So what's happening is things that have been done since the 80s to train astronauts is getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper in our hands. And that form factor now is about the same price as a Chromebook. Right. So your entry point is really at a reasonable place now to do some experimentation. The question is do you have a champion and somebody who can manage all of the oversight, the maintenance, the staying on top of the applications, having relationships with the actual developers and the development agencies so you can make sure that you get the latest updates and features, and also maybe get some of the features you ask for integrated into the tools you're working with. I found oftentimes as a beta tester and an alpha tester and going out and having relationships relationships with these companies makes the application much stronger, makes the integration much stronger. I come from an education background where I was in the classroom. I've been a tech integrator. I've run tech companies. So now, it's a little bit of all of that. So I come in to support all of the exploration. Then the stage is next is a proof of concept or a pilot of some sort. You got to dip your toes in the water and see if it's going to work. Gather data, figure out if it's worth it, and then either get grant funding, current funding, or find ways to get corporate sponsorship and make something bigger happen. And if it works, something bigger will happen after that. And that's what I've found, right? Is every time there's a successful implementation, it grows a little bit. And this is not a be-all, end-all solution. I don't think they should be take-home devices. I really think at this stage, they need to be managed and controlled by an expert. The moment you let these things go out into the wild, you're going to be losing a lot of control, right? At least in the ecosystem that exists right now. I think eventually where Meta is coming up with management systems and platforms that will be tailored for education and for enterprise, you have systems like Manage XR and Arbor XR. These are all like management and deployment systems that would allow you to control a fleet of headsets and update them all at the same time. The simple fact is that a lot of these applications are like the wild, wild west. And if you don't have controls on them, you're going to put your kids in a very unsafe and uncontrolled environment, right? So those things are really critical as you start to put these things out at scale and with purpose and intent. You got to lock them down in kiosk mode. You got to have it specific for what you're trying to accomplish. Right now it's still very exploratory. We're in the Atari days of what will be immersive computing. And, it's fun to be here as a 45-year-old individual who's been told to stop playing with toys and games and all this stuff for my entire life. I found this place where I'm no longer with a big tech company. I'm no longer in a classroom, but I'm doing something I've dreamed about doing for a long, long time. And I also get to help show teachers. And I think Irene's on the call with Damon. I had a great presentation yesterday and was able to kind of demo, exactly what's possible today. And integrated eye tracking, face tracking, and just the power and capability of hand tracking. It's really amazing, but it's one of these things I could tell people till I'm blue in the face. However, it really takes that experience. You have to really dive in to understand its value. And I think that's the first step for everybody is test it for yourself. See if there's others who want to experiment and realize that you're going to be in a perpetual experiment. This is never going to be a polished, finished thing because even when it's delivered to you as that, a month later, there'll be an update. so yeah, that's what I found.
And just remembering that there's this whole panoply of different ways of thinking about, extended reality, and they aren't all high-tech goggles, right? Like my aunt, when she got her teaching certificate, I found one of her old textbooks, and there was a whole chapter on how to use an opaque projector to do essentially augmented reality. Right. So putting objects on an opaque projector and then marking it up on the chalkboard, right? Like you have other options too to play around with the extended reality space that don't involve, like, as Alex is saying, there's the possibility now that we can think about classroom sets of goggles. But there's also things like, hey, a field trip to the science museum, or hey, we can do sort of low tech augmented reality with an iPad by having objects superimposed on the real world, just like the IKEA app will show you what the furniture looks like in your house, right? There are ways to think about these techniques, these pedagogical techniques that don't always have to be as heavy a lift as like making all these technological decisions that can be quite expensive. And being able to understand like, hey, it's okay if maybe we don't do VR goggles, but we take a field trip to the planetarium and they have a show that investigates XYZ, right? Like there's ways to imagine these techniques being useful and just kind of keeping your eyes open about what's coming down on the horizon, because at some point goggles will be cheap, or maybe we won't even have goggles. We'll just clip something onto our eyeglasses and it'll be teeny tiny.
I feel like it's going to be ski goggles that are just going to be like everything in front of us. We're just all going to be wearing ski goggles. Yeah.
So many possibilities.
Awesome. Alrighty, we've got maybe time for one more question. I know we're coming right up on that 5 o'clock. Alrighty. If folks are shy about asking questions on the recording, I'm going to stop it now.